why are there boxes? Why are we maybe even overusing them on so many different levels? And what is the implication of using them?
It's human nature for us to try to categorize things. There's a lot going on in the world, and our brain tries to take these shortcuts and create boxes of things that it thinks are similar. One example of the way that we've created boxes is these use of age labels. Example, Boomers, Gen X, Millennials. The reality is that people don't often agree with each other, even when they're in the same demographic group, whether it's the same age group or the same gender or the same race. And assuming that people will want the same thing or behave the same way just because they're the same age is absolutely ridiculous.
The idea of job security is outdated as a landline. If you haven't been in a search for a while, it's probable you will at some point, by choice or not. Most executives admit to staying way too long or sense what's coming and justify staying anyway. Here, there's another reason. The faulty belief that navigating to what's next will inevitably be worse and has to suck. Screw that. Lauren Greif has spent a lifetime in corporate and executive search, calling bullshit on stale career advice that most still use. This is Career Blast in a Half, the career podcast for executives ready to cut past outdated career advice to fuel your outcomes now. So let's go.
Well, we're here today to talk about some labels, not the ones that are on the package at the grocery store, not the ones that are your title, the ones that we have, all of us, have decided to use to categorize different ages, stages, and even stereotypes. So today we have not only somebody who I greatly admire, a wonderful risk taker, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about that, but someone, Sheila Callaham, who is the founder of the Age Equity Alliance. We're going to also include the link so that you can go find out more. But really, one of the reasons why Sheila is here, among many, is because she is helping to break down those labels, those barriers, and those stereotypes, and in many ways to school me and maybe even school you on what to say, what not to say, because so many of us in the workforce are using terms like, okay, boomer, or yeah, you entitled millennial, even if it's not directly to your face. That's how you're talking about your colleagues and your coworkers and maybe your bosses and partners behind the scenes. And that, even though they might not be directly hearing it, they can feel it. And so, Sheila, thank you so much. I know this is like literally there's like history behind this particular episode, and Sheila has taught me so much. And so welcome to Career Blast and a Half.
And Lauren, it is great to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, I want you to tell us also, because I already tipped my hand in calling you a risk taker. And when I first got to know you, you were not a Forbes contributor, you were not a Forbes writer, you were not like in the place of founder of Age Equity Alliance. I think that you had been recently like leaving, let go from the world of corporate. And what I really want to kind of rewind to is, what was the thought process respecting, where you were and your thoughts on age then, and how might they be different now?
Well, that actually isn't my backstory.
Okay, well, right.
So my backstory is that in 2011, I had been in the corporate world for about 15 years. And I really, really, really wanted to step out for a while and be with my sons who were growing up too fast. And I had, one in elementary school, 2 in high school, and one that was still living at home, but in university. And I just, I had been working really, really hard, and my kids were growing up so fast. And I had decided to leave my employment and just be a full-time mom. And that's what I did. And It's not like, when the kids went to school, I sat, on the sofa and watched soaps. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Um, but, I also started a part-time coaching business. I wrote several books. I contributed to several anthologies. I created an amazing garden. And so I did a lot of things. And then when I decided to go back to work 7 years later, that's when I found the resistance. That's when I figured out, not right away though, but when I eventually figured out that the reason why the opportunities for employment were closed to me is because of my age. I was in my early 50s at the time. And that really is the impetus for, first of all, pitching Forbes and writing about this topic. Because what happened when after several years of trying and never one time getting a job offer, I started going back and looking up the jobs on LinkedIn just to kind of see, okay, well, who's getting these jobs? I'm curious to know. And it's not that the people who were getting the jobs were younger than me, Lauren, because, I love working with people of all ages. And so that wasn't the problem. What shocked me was that the people who were getting these jobs were like decades younger than me. They were like people that were still in their 20s who had executive level titles. And that was the part that really surprised me most and really set me back. And so I had to get my head together. And I thought about it and I said, but wait a minute. I know what this problem is. I know how to address this problem. I've been doing this work before. I know this is a culture change initiative. I just need to create a platform. And so I pitched Forbes and they brought me on to write in what was then called the DEI channel. And now they've moved me under leadership. But I started writing for Forbes and I had been writing for about 6 months. And I realized that a platform, even as big as Forbes, was not creating the change. I knew that to create the change, I needed to be in the businesses because people really don't always recognize the way they're being ageist, not only to other people, but to themselves. And that I knew that if I could get in the business, I could help create awareness, and with awareness, create change.
Mm. So I'm so delighted that you corrected me. Like I said, you're here to school me. So I'm glad that you put me on the right track because many, many, many people, and I know that it is predominantly women who often are the caretakers, whether they're for children or for their elderly parents in that sandwich generation. And oftentimes that's either, a fear to reenter and or an impetus for them to never come back. And so you really capitalized on, the observation, which even though it may have seemed at the time obvious, sometimes when we're actually in it, it doesn't necessarily reveal itself in the same way of having that objectivity. And so hearing from you about returning back to work and also getting into organizations with a platform, my next question is, why are there boxes? Why are we, I know from a demographic standpoint, but why are we maybe even overusing them on so many different levels, and what is the implication of using them?
Well, and that's a great question. And it really kind of boils down to human psychology. Uh, it's human nature for us to try to categorize things. There's a lot in the world. There's a lot going on in the world, and our brain tries to take these shortcuts and create boxes of things that it thinks are similar. And so part of it is just human nature. But one example, and you've already, brought this up, one example of the way that we've created boxes that have really, really hurt us is these use of, I call them age labels. And I call them age labels instead of generational labels because the first myth about the labels is that they're generational labels at all. So if you think, for example, the boomers, the Gen X, the millennials, let's see, boomers, Gen X, millennials. Oh wait, I forgot the Gen Ys. The Gen Ys. You see. I mean, really, who even knows this thing? Um, the thing is that they're not generations at all. A generation is if I'm working in an organization and one of my parents, who are both deceased, works in that organization, and one of my grandparents, all deceased, work in that organization. One of my children work in that organization, and one of my grandchildren work in that organization. That's 5 generations in the workplace. Nobody has 5 generations. And so this whole idea about generational labels is such a misnomer. And so how these labels get assigned, they're just randomly assigned. The number of years, the ages within a particular age group or age label is random. It's either 15 years, 18 years, 20 years. It's not even the same. There's no scientific principle guiding any of this. And I've written about this so many times in Forbes over the last 6 years, and I teach it at every opportunity I have inside of organizations, because the reality is that people don't often agree with each other, even when they're in the same demographic group, whether it's the same age group or the same gender or the same race. They're just not going to agree with each other. And assuming that people will want the same thing or behave the same way just because they're the same age is absolutely ridiculous.
And so here we are, like I'm doing a simulation here. And let's just say I'm your boss and I'm 25 years younger than you are. And, I want to make some kind of comment about something that you're doing in the workplace. How do I neutralize that? How do I not say something like, oh yeah, Sheila, she's, I could use a title, but I could say, yeah, she's a boomer, right? That could easily happen, I would imagine. I don't think there's anybody policing that in the organizations. What would I say instead, or nothing at all? Help me to better apply just some neutralized, unbiased, not misleading ways of talking about people.
Well, in an organization, I think the best thing is that people just use names. You have to think, why would you use a label? Why would you say, somebody who's Black or, somebody who's, I don't know, Muslim? Why would you label anybody? And the same way you don't normally label people by race or gender, the person, who functions with a disability. We don't do that. Why would we label people by age? Just use their name.
It is best to label people. And sadly, it still keeps happening.
And it does, yeah.
And so, we've all heard this, right? Ageism is one of the last permissible biases that's out there. And so in those kinds of situations, whether it's in the office or out of the office, what do you recommend? I heard you say, yes, use names, just use their name. Sheila, Lauren, John, Mary, whatever that is, just refer to people as people. But how do we get rid of some of those systemic labels that happen even outside of the workplace? How do we replace those things when what you have already shared with respect to the bogosity, I'm just making that up, the bogus nature of just saying these things, 5 generations in the workforce? And how do we create a more inclusive culture when we know that that helps drive profitability and bottom line results?
Yeah. So, I know that I've heard this too, and I think I even wrote it some years ago in one of my articles that ageism is the last permissible bias, but I don't even think we can say that anymore. I mean, look at what's going on in our administration, the fact that there are executive orders preventing language in DEI. The New York Times published last week a list of almost 200 words that are being stricken from usage. And these are very important words. And when I look at the list, I mean, these are words like inclusion, bias, um, Black, intersectionality. About half of the words on the list, probably more, are words that I've used in the last 5 years of working with AEA and the last 6 years of writing for Forbes to educate people on ageism. And these words are important because, again, any kind of the root of any ism starts with some kind of bias or stereotype or assumption that we're making about a group of person or a person based on the group that we put them in, right? And we have to use language like bias. We have to use language like inclusion so that people understand what it means. And when our words are being taken away from us, how can we do that? I think that most leaders want a workplace culture that is productive, that employees feel that they can, I know this is an old way of saying this, but can bring their whole selves to work, and be fully present and not work in an environment where they fear being bullied or excluded or othered. That does not make a workplace successful. It does not make a workplace, where people can do their best work every day. And that's what leaders want. They just want their employees to come to work, to be satisfied, to be happy, because you know what? They want to keep them. And in environments where people are not happy, where they don't feel safe, where they don't feel included, they're not going to stay. And the cost of turnover is one of the biggest costs that organizations face. And so how do we do that? How do we fix that? All I can say, Lauren, I mean, as it is, I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. I don't think any of us know anymore. But the only way that we can address any kind of bias or stereotype is through creating awareness. And one of the things that I like to tell people is that when we think about ageism, I don't want people to think that, if they accidentally make a statement that's based on age, that, it's not a crime. We all do it because we're all human and we all have biases and we all make assumptions. The thing is that we need to be aware of the way that it shows up in the workplace, and we need to feel okay about holding ourselves and each other accountable for recognizing it, because only through this awareness can we go, oh, well, that's really irrelevant. It doesn't really matter that so-and-so is only 28, right? They show that they're ready for a leadership position. Oh, it doesn't matter that somebody is 60. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're ready to retire. So, just recognizing the way that we're allowing age to come up in the workplace, and then recognizing that it's not relevant and that we're making assumptions. And the only way we can really know is, based on the skills and competency and ability that someone displays in the workplace, and asking them, what do you want? How do you work best? What are your long-term goals? You know, just ask people. They'll usually tell you.
So there's two things that you cited here that I want to make sure that we loop our audience into. Number one, we will also include the New York Times article. This was yesterday, so that was just today's the 17th, so March 16th. And what it talks about in this article is that as of January, 60% of the S&P 500 have really started to make some dramatic modifications to a lot of their financial filings. And so that article and also some of the commentary will be available. And then also included in what you just talked about was your organization, the Age Equity Alliance, and its mission to help to build awareness. And so I have to ask you, like, as the barometer, as the person who is not just leading it, but also like behind the scenes, how are we doing? Where are we in creating some kind of equity? I'm hoping there's a lot of alliance, but where are we on the other end?
Well, I think that we're struggling. I think most leaders don't understand the changing demographics, even though think tanks have been talking about this since the mid 80s. They haven't really thought about the shrinking talent pool, the fact that people are living longer, and that for decades on end around the world, the birth rates have, been shrinking. And so there's not that group of talent coming up behind. So I think, leaders are kind of behind the curveball there and thinking more long term about talent sustainability, which to me as a leader is incredibly important to think about. The other thing is that, and I'm just going to be really honest here, we've been working on gender equity and racial equity for decades, and we've really not been successful there. And to quote my friend Ashton Applewhite, if we can't get that right, I don't know. We just have to keep trying. We have to keep educating. We have to keep showing people the benefits of diversity and inclusion in the workplace, even though those words are, foreboding. We just have to keep trying, and that's the only thing that we can do.
So you talked about, how we're all living longer, and that, but also, one of the undercurrents of what you're talking about is longevity mindset. And so can you speak to that? Because I think that they are in many ways inextricably linked. And I'm curious, what is longevity mindset? How can we maybe even adopt it? How can we even start there? Because sometimes it's hard to know which comes first, the chicken or the egg, the action or the mindset. And so in this case, I'm asking you to kickstart us in one of these areas for sure.
Well, I'm really, really excited about the concept of longevity mindset. And it's actually Age Equity Alliance spent almost all of last year creating a longevity mindset index. And so what that index does is it measures employee perceptions at work, and helps predict how longevity ready a company is based on the indicators. And so, for example, a part of a longevity mindset is, I talked about this earlier, how in my career I wanted to off ramp. And then the only way I could convince my husband to support me in this, because we were a dual income family, was if I promised him this is temporary. I do plan to on ramp and finish what I started, but the on ramp, never happened. But if we're living longer lives and we're working longer, not only because we might need to financially, but because we enjoy it. We enjoy being a part of a team. We enjoy contributing. And there's research that shows that people who stay more active in the workplace, they're happier. They have better mental health outcomes and live longer because they're being more social with other people. So I've long been a believer that measuring employee perceptions is one of the best ways to understand your workplace. The employee perceptions, the conditions that they feel they're working in, their behaviors, their experiences. And so by asking employees questions related to the workplace culture, age at work, how financially secure they feel, how they feel the company supports them in upskilling and reskilling, and these kinds of topics that are indicators for a company that is thinking more along this longevity mindset. When we ask them and they give you that feedback, to me, that provides leaders with a solid foundation to identify the biggest opportunities for creating and implementing a strategy that results in a workplace that all ages want to work in and stay in. So again, this goes back to retention being key and the fact that talent sustainability is going to become increasingly challenging. And I would say in the next 5 years, it's really, the companies are really going to feel it.
So for all of us who aren't familiar with Age Equity Alliance, how do we get involved? Where can we as lay people, I'm not necessarily, or even organizations, where can we go and how can we benefit?
So yes, visit us at ageequityalliance.org. We are a volunteer-run organization. We're a small team, but we're mighty, and we have we're very fortunate and have worked very hard to provide content and resources that are valuable. We're although we're a Texas-based nonprofit 501c3, we do have global clients, and I will say, Lauren, that in the U.S. things might be really shaky in terms of where DEI sits and how does that impact age. But in Europe, they're much more on board with this notion of longevity mindset. And that's actually where we have the most interest in the work we do. But there is on our website, you can request our white paper on the longevity mindset. Happy to send that to anybody. That's where people can contact us if they're interested in training or speaking or participating on a panel, all of those good things.
Well, I am not only so thrilled that you have this initiative, but also just as a first step, everyone, please follow Sheila on LinkedIn, and she is super responsive. But I am indebted to you, not just for me, for a lot of our clients who are in this particular phase and stage of life and want to either come back on or go back out or whatever they decide to do, and really ensuring that they are included. And what we talked about from that article is ageism or age, in the bucket of DE&I. And there's some questions about that. I have been seeing a lot more traction with the smaller companies where they are not as, I guess you could say, reliant on a lot of those policy changes, and they are more independently able to make decisions and less bureaucratically. So that's always a viable option, is to build that. But no matter what, please reach out to Sheila and check out the link to Age Equity Alliance. Sheila Callaham, thank you for all your articles. Also on Forbes, we'll include a couple of those. Please, educate yourself, whether you're an employer, an employee, somebody who is maybe even just starting out. Make sure that you understand this is a lot of change going on, and you want to have your pillars and people who are in this space on a regular basis and really leading the charge. So for that, I am grateful and thank you. And for everyone who's listening today, thank you. Thank you always. Thank you so much. Our podcast has reached 1.5 globally. We are here to call BS on outdated career advice and make sure that you have the latest and greatest. Thank you for all of your reviews. It's working. You guys are really listening. So thanks. And I appreciate that so much. So we will look forward to seeing you again next week with another wonderful guest and more blow your mind insights. So have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for joining today. We appreciate your listening ears. Big time. We ask this: use these tools, not tomorrow, right now, and share them by spreading the love, leaving us a rating and subscribe so you don't miss the next career blast in a half. Most of all, thank you for you.